Solomon asked God if the people lifted up militarism and deployed troops on its own people, could they solicit God for forgiveness? Solomon asked God if the people were bad stewards of the world and they polluted the water, the land, and the sky, could they approach the altar and ask for and receive God's forgiveness? Solomon asked God if the people voted for and elected a twice impeached 34-count convicted felon for president, could they get on their knees and pray to God and ask for forgiveness? It's when we get to chapter 7 that we see and hear God's response to Solomon. This is where God tells them to humble themselves and pray, to seek his face, to turn from their wicked ways. Then and only then will he hear from them. And then and only then will he forgive them of their sins. And then and only then will he heal their land. So as you can see, it's important to read what becomes before and after scripture passages. We have to be careful when we quote scriptures to make sure we're not taking them out of context for our own selfish gain. Today, I'd like to give you 3 quick points this scripture highlights about what it takes for God to hear from us, to forgive us, and to heal our land. The first one is that we should approach God with humility. The Gospel of Luke tells us that everyone who exalts himself will be humble, and that he who humbles himself will be exalted. The text opens with a condition: if my people, who are called by my name, will humble themselves. If my people, who are called by my name, will humble themselves. Humility is realizing that we are living in a state of spiritual bankruptcy, that we are spiritually deficient at times. Prayer begins when we admit that we're not God. That's the problem. Sometimes some of us pray as if we're praying to ourselves, as if we are God. Humility isn't a sign of weakness. Humility is actually strength under control. Some of the strongest people I know are some of the humblest people I know. Humility means having an honest perception of ourselves, our strengths and our struggles, without arrogance. You want to know who exemplified humility? Jesus. He emptied himself of his right to the throne to come down and to serve mankind. He deprived himself of the omnipotence of God. He neglected his own wants and needs and desires to leave his heavenly home to dwell among us and walk in this sinful world. Beloved, wouldn't it be wonderful if our politicians, especially the occupant of 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, practiced humility, that same self-denying humility Jesus showed? Humility is something that banks can't buy. Humility is something that politicians can't legislate. Humility is something that lawyers can't litigate. Humility teaches us to bend our knees before we raise our fists. Let me repeat that for you. Humility teaches us to bend our knees before we raise our fists. Think about our ancestors shackled and scarred, but they still cried out, "Father, I stretch my hand to thee. No other help I know. If thou withdraw thyself from thee, whither shall I go?" Our ancestors understood that humility ushered them into the presence of God. Let me ask you something. In times of trouble and times of despair, are you humble enough to say, "Lord, I need you. Lord, I have to have you"? Or do you say, "God, I got this, God. I got this"? Are you still trying to live on your own strength? This is when we're trying to live outside of humility. So what happens when we live a life of humility? When we live a life of humility, we subdue the flesh so that we can live in the spirit. When we live in humility, we don't rush God. We appreciate God's timing. When we live in humility, we trust that God knows what God is doing and doesn't need our help. When we live in humility, we operate in the will that God has for our lives. When we live in humility, we hear the voice of God when he tells us to go left. When we live in humility, we hear the voice of God when he tells us to go right. When we live in humility, we hear the voice of God when he tells us to stand still. When we live in humility, we hear the voice of God when he tells us to move. When we live in humility, we understand that when we are weak, God is strong. We must learn to live in humility. And when we live humbly, we have access to the one who is the source of all our strength. God is not a resource. God is our source.